You don't need the BBC, ITV, or any of these big channel. What do you call them? Because they're not. I suppose they've got a couple of the airwaves, haven't they? And that's it, really. I mean, the BBC have got millions.
They could have adverts, but without adverts. So what you'd have, like product placement. So David Attenborough would be with the mountain gorilla, and then he'd take a sip of Coke. That is refreshing. And so you do it like that, so you don't have to have adverts.
And the arrogance of these two organisations not to take Boris Johnson's speech, I think it was just absolutely appalling how they can justify that.
And the Brexit Party, they didn't do that, you know.
No, they didn't show any at all. No, because they think they know better than all of us, and that's the problem with some of the media. They're all kind of wokey this, wokey that. They don't want to offend anybody. They blur out the pictures of this particularly unfortunate kid that decided to become a terrorist. Don't blur them out. Let people see the consequences of their actions. I am quite angry tonight, I have to tell you. And this whole thing, it's becoming farcical now. We let people out of prison after a few months and they carry out atrocities like this. When are the people who are in charge ever going to learn? I mean, the people who are in charge of different things at the moment do not deserve to be there, do they?
Well, they were watching him as well. So if you're watching him, they shouldn't have been let out on probation, should they?
No, the police actually have had nothing but problems having to run round after these people because those in charge... I tell you who I blame it on.
It shows even if you're watching them, you can't stop them.
No, well, just, you know, do what they had to do. And all this, we can't fill the prisons up with these people. I mean, we haven't got the room. Just build some
Yeah, but if they're having to
ones.
follow him when he's let out early, they shouldn't. Obviously, shouldn't have been let out early.
No, that's what the police are saying. It's the judiciary. Yeah. It's all the politicians. Well, our prisons are too full.
Or is it the law that they need to change the law? Maybe the law says they had to let him out. There was no choice.
They've recently changed the law so they don't have to. And I think it's the fault of this Supreme Court. I mean, when did we ever decide to get a Supreme Court who seem to be able to sort of squash everything? Yeah. And maybe it's time that people start talking against it.
We didn't need to change it. Look at the damage it caused before.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, it's against people's rights, and forget people who feel that they wish to carry out some sort of terrorist act or have voiced these sort of opinions before do not deserve to have free rein in our society. They don't deserve to walk the same streets as you and I do. They need to be locked away. They don't need to be given any kind of, you know, it's almost as if they're given preferential treatment. Then what do? They all go off and they try to form this caliphate where if people don't do what they think, they get their heads chopped off or they get hung, you know, and if they dare to be gay, goodness only knows what's going to happen. Religious intolerance, I've had enough of it. I've absolutely had enough of it. I'm flipping angry about this. I know the police are absolutely spitting feathers about it. I've heard on the radio today, I heard Mike try to reason with some person who says, oh, well, you know, you've got to obey the law and all this. No, you haven't. If these people are going to behave like this, we need to change the law. We need it to be changed.
He only had 3 years, 4 months sentence, but he was let out after about a year and a bit. Only a few days he'd been out.
You know, I've no idea. I know they're mentally ill. I know they can't help what they're doing, but that is not our problem. And it just...
There was no power to keep him behind bars.
And what are you going to say to those poor people who've been stabbed? One apparently has very severe injuries.
Oh, yeah. Lucky that no one was killed.
Yeah. I mean, and they're lining up to do the same thing. And so maybe people who have terrorist thoughts in them, then maybe there's a place they're put and they're left there until they either can convince people they've changed their minds. But even then, do you believe them? I don't know what you do.
Well, now the London Bridge, he'd done that. He was at an event for people that have helped, you know, put them on the straight and narrow. And obviously he was just pretending, just giving the right answers till the time was right to strike.
I think we have to stop pussyfooting around and we have to stop actually placating these people. And the people who placate them, the people who say, oh, well, it's not their fault. We do need to try and work out how we can actually rehabilitate them. I tell you what, tell them there's no God.
You can't.
Tell them there is no God. Tell them they're barking up the wrong tree.
Well, they won't believe you.
Well, no, of course not. Well, maybe society doesn't need these people. And don't think of sending them somewhere because they're going to start up a...
You have to think of some reason.
So anybody who's got any ideas, what you do with these sort of people, tell me. 0344 499 1000. Have you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I have actually, because there's some sentences that I thought were a very bad thing that they gave to certain prisoners who've served their full sentence and they still won't let them out because they're deemed dangerous. And I thought that was against their civil liberties, But in this case, where there's no way of changing their mind because it's their belief, maybe there should be a way to keep them permanently away. Because if they're just going to come out... But, I mean, the thing is, when you get to a certain age, you don't bother doing that sort of thing, do you? When you get to 40 years old, it's out your system normally.
Is it?
You don't get many 40-year-old terrorists, do you? 45-year-old, 50-year-old terrorists.
Well, I don't... Well, no, you're right.
Well, look at the facts.
Yeah, no, you're right. That's a very good point.
So lock them up till they're 40-odd, and then they'll probably have calmed down.
Well, that is a good idea. Or did they all disappear somewhere else to carry out and to be in control of the younger ones?
Well,
Sorry, I've got a bit of a frog in my throat, but anyway, this guy was 20, released about a week ago, serving half his sentence. We've done that. 3 people were injured, but 1 is now in a life-threatening condition. The MP for Streatham has said that this person was under police surveillance, although... They said something quite different, I think, yesterday, but never mind. Why should we pay so much money, have them kept under police surveillance? They just keep them in flipping prison. It just absolutely, it must upset the Prime Minister. He's fuming as well. I mean, how many police to tail one guy? 30? Because you
still can't stop, someone running around. You still can't do anything.
No. Well, you can, but they have to do something before you do it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then how long before you can get the guy and shoot the person? And, I can't understand why they're all running around in pretend bomb vests. Why are they doing that? And what's the point?
I suppose it keeps people away, maybe.
I don't know. It's not working, obviously, is it? But well done to our police. Absolutely well done to them. And let's talk to my very good friend, Security Supremo Will Geddes about this. Will, good evening. I'm fuming. I'm just getting so flipping fed up with this. I've had a real day of being annoyed about this. This is just unbelievable stupidity on the part of the, I suppose, the judiciary and the people who work in the prison service and everything else. What is wrong with these people?
James, where can one start? I'm entirely in sympathy with you and agreement, and I think pretty much the entire population of the United Kingdom is in parallel with you. I mean, it's something which, to be honest, Boris Johnson has to address now. They looked at obviously revising the law at the end of last year after the attack by Ehsan on the 29th of November on London Bridge. But it all got kind of delayed. And now I think the pressure is on Prime Minister Johnson to actually get it done.
He's got a majority now to do it as well.
Yeah, yeah. And you see, every time somebody does something pretty tough, then the people who sympathise with these idiots, and there are many, including, I think, the father of the guy who was killed on London Bridge. There are people who just seem to think that it is everybody else's fault and that we should be doing stuff to help rehabilitate them. But, I mean, is it worth rehabilitating people who are prepared to do this?
Well, I think it is, James. And I mean, if we look at examples of rehabilitation and de-radicalisation programs that have been run in places like Saudi Arabia and even Denmark, for that matter, they've been highly successful in certainly reducing those that have got extreme beliefs. And I've actually met a few individuals that work very, very tirelessly hard in the de-radicalisation process and have been very successful. I mean, they themselves, having been former jihadis, they have been successful in what they've achieved in certainly changing the mindset of some of these individuals. However, I'm a little bit more black and white about it. And I think, number one, yes, by all means, give them the opportunity and give them, more importantly, the resources. And that's what hopefully Priti Patel is putting together with Boris Johnson, a sufficient budget to be able to do this. But if you come out of prison and you intend harm to members of the general public, then your justice will be served by members of specialist firearms officers or counter-terrorism special firearms officers, as we saw in Streatham and as we saw certainly on London Bridge.
But he'd been rehabilitated, they thought. That's the trouble. You don't know when they're they can just give all the right answers.
Well, again, Nash, that comes back to the fact that there's not enough checks and balances in the de-radicalisation sort of provenance when they come up to the parole board, or for that matter, in the current judiciary, as James, you were saying, that was allowing individuals to be released on licence, having served, half or even less than half of the sentence that they were actually given.
But, the problem is, as I said before, the father of one of the guys killed, or the guy killed on London Bridge, said that his son wanted was trying to help these people become de-radicalised and didn't want stiffer penalties, wanted people to be... I mean, I don't see how this is working. Well, blatantly it isn't working. But what happens is that there's a stiff sentence passed, then somebody decides they're going to go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decides their what is the word I'm looking for, Ash? Their human rights have been infringed, and says
because he was allowed out legally. I mean, they couldn't hold him back, this guy. So they need to change the law.
Is it time to bring back internment? We had that during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. I remember it very well.
Well, it's a difficult one, James. I mean, internment has some advantages, but it has some huge disadvantages. And we've seen that with Gitmo, with Guantanamo Bay, where individuals have been kept for an indeterminable sentence and then subsequently released, only to then go on and commit terrorist acts again. It's a really, really difficult process. But the only way I think it's potentially achievable is to actually throw the money into the process of de-radicalisation to ensure that all the checks and balances can be done before the individual is released. And then when they're released on licence, or even when they've served all their time, that they are given a community mentor, which is someone that will check in and monitor them on an ongoing basis. Because, quite frankly, to invest the money into significant active surveillance, as we saw in Streatham yesterday, is hugely resource draining and very, very expensive. And I know that from running many, many, many surveillance operations over many years.
I mean, a lot of people are still criticising the police. Well, I say a lot of people, a number, saying if they were trailing this man, why was he able to do it anyway? Why didn't they just arrest him?
Well, again, I can only speculate, James. I wasn't on the inside of that job, so I don't know what were the trigger points to them deciding they had to take decisive action. I mean, the police and the firearms officers operate under a particular sort of code and process, which used to be called Operation Kratos, which was developed by coordination with the Israelis in dealing with suicide bombers, that you just take decisive action. If you believe that they've got a suicide vest on, you literally just simply take the shot. There's no dynamic risk assessment as you might with, say, a conventional criminal that's carrying a weapon of some description. But the question could be that, again, because of the judicial structure, the team had to wait for a sufficient time for sufficient evidence to be gathered to then be able to secure a prosecution or a charge, certainly, to getting this individual, again, reincarcerated. I'll try and get my words out. But, again, it's very, very difficult. You can't put someone away purely based on intelligence. You need the evidence to back it up.
But this is we are being hampered. I still don't really understand why we ever needed this Supreme Court. Maybe it's time for that to be got rid of.
Well, I think there's got to be dispensations within the Supreme Court. And I think, again, this is what this revised counter-terrorism bill is going to try and address, which is these are not conventional criminals. These are particular specialist persons that have committed and are prone to commit heinous crimes that are not directed at singular targets. These are at mass targets. This is at literally anybody that potentially is in their way. So, again, we're looking at minimum 15-year sentences, but also conditions beyond that point before they're even released. And if necessary, they're kept in for, indeterminable periods. I mean, the same applies to the murderers of Lee Rigby, they're kept in prison for life. Then probably very unlikely to ever see the light of free light of day again.
But they are, as we speak, I believe, trying to get themselves released in all kinds of ways. They've even got people who sympathise with them and are trying to get them released.
Well, those that try and sympathise with them, I mean, again, I'm not so clear-cut on it, James, in so much as one should damn them. I think, thank goodness there are people out there that will take that view and will potentially defend individuals. Whether we agree with that or not, if we were, for whatever reason, on the wrong end of the law, we would want those people potentially to come to our defence. However, and there's a big however, when it comes to terrorism, that's a whole different kettle of fish in my book.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know what we do now. I am so angry about this.
It's the first time it's happened that they were watching him. It's never happened before, has it? Apart from in Northern Ireland.
Well, we don't. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I'm going to talk to somebody about that in a moment. But the thing is, what do? You don't release these people who have had been put away for some really extreme views and strange behaviour, probably mentally ill. And then just let them out because we've got this new law that says it was brought in because our prisons are too full. Let's get rid of the people in prison who didn't pay their TV licenses. Let's get rid of the people in prison who've done some kind of non-violent thing. Maybe they defrauded somebody, bad as that is. I'm not saying it isn't. They need to be punished. But there must be other ways to punish people who aren't going round with guns or trying to beat the what's-it out of us.
Yeah, no, I agree, James. I think there has to be a complete rejig of the prison system and the Crown Prosecution Service in terms of how particular sort of punishments are awarded for individuals. And I think for those that are offenders of non-violent crimes need to be treated in another way. And there needs to be some level of sort of staged prisons system like they have in the United States. I mean, for white-collar criminals, for example, there's one particular individual that I know, I wouldn't count him as a friend, but I know, who's about to serve 5 months in an open prison, as we would call them over here, in the United States. And this is probably not that much different to a country club. But he didn't hurt specific individuals. He was done for a particular white-collar crime, and it wasn't necessarily against poor innocent persons that had invested in a financial scheme or something like that. So I think there does have to be some sort of tiered system. I mean, your question of internment, James, there are prisons within prisons for those that have committed terrorist offences. But the problem they have in the prisons is that they're clubbed together and they pretty much kind of feed off each other.
Yeah, you need segregation, don't you? Because, like you say, they feed off each other.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
I mean, I think something has got to be radically done, and I think we've got to possibly take the prisons out of private company ownerships and put them back maybe under the governance of a police force or something, and have professional,
ex-military people used to run it. Yeah,
and we need proper professional prison guards, and we need to pay them accordingly. Otherwise, we get what's going on. And the people who work in prisons who seem quite often this is, I'm not painting every prison officer like this at all, but the amount of phones and drugs that get illegally into prison has to be stopped. I mean, prisons seem to be completely useless.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of argument to be said right now, particularly about taking the parole board and certainly probation out of the private sector and putting it back into the public. I think it's something that seriously needs to be considered in terms of the quality control. But I also do take your point, James, that in terms of prison officers, quite often they're overwhelmed with the number of criminals that they're having to caretake, and the monies that they're being paid is not that significant. So. I think it's easy to damn them for the amount of contraband because criminals are very, very smart, very clever.
Yeah, I know.
It's like, for example, spice, the drug that is quite often used, can be impregnated into letters, can be impregnated into all sorts of inert elements which you wouldn't conventionally believe or conceive that they could smuggle in. But they manage to do it regardless. I mean, technology's coming certainly a long way to intercepting and detecting this kind of contraband that's getting in. But, the criminals, many of them are very smart and they'll find ways around it.
Well, maybe we need to look at the whole thing, and maybe people who work within the prison service need to be paid properly, not just we try and get the cheapest thing we can to do this.
Have they stopped the drones getting into prison, or is that still going on?
The what?
Yeah, no, they have.
flying
They have.
drones.
Certainly the drones in terms of preventing them, and that's through two ways, Ash. That's through both the programming within the software of the actual drones, but also in the capabilities that some of the prisons have to being able to sort of intercept drone signals to prevent them to be able to fly over that. In the same way as there are blockers that many prisons are using now to intercept cell phone signals. But again, that's a difficult challenge because, prison officers and prison governors and prison staff need to be able to use their cell phones. And, it's not that precise that you can isolate it to one specific area. It will blanket the whole area.
But you could have them open to Wi-Fi, couldn't you, the prison officers' phones?
Yeah, you can do. But again, you could open that up potentially for the phones that the criminals have managed to smuggle in as well, actually.
Yeah.
It needs actually, we need to divert more money into our prison system. And when I think of the money that is being wasted on different things, it's not going to be too difficult. And they say, oh, well, this is expensive, we'll do this differently. Whoever makes these decisions, I think that the Prime Minister has to take more control and stop allowing the civil service and everybody else to actually make decisions that should be made by the elected representatives of us.
Well, quite often, again, the challenge they've got, James, is actually implementing the measures. I mean, Peter Clark, who I know quite well, was actually involved in running an audit across all the prison systems in the United Kingdom. And Peter came back with a very, very long list of recommendations. The challenge was the government assigning the necessary funds and budget to implement those recommendations. So, it all points back to the government. And this is the time for Boris Johnson and Priti Patel to shine. They've got to deliver where people happened in the past, whether that be in their own party or whether that be in the opposition. We've got to get a grip of this. And I think the first thing is circling back to, obviously, the terrorism issue. In terms of incarceration, there's no time to waste. They need to get on it now.
All right. Will, good to talk. Thank you very much indeed. We'll get his security experts. Have you got any thoughts, guys? Call us. 03444991,000. Let's take a couple of calls, shall we? And then we're going to take a short break, and then we're going to talk to Dr. Rakib, Ehsan, research fellow from the Centre of Radicalisation.
Oh, no.
I'm losing my voice again. So actually, I've done a lot of shouting at the news today.
Yeah. They can't hear you, though.
No, I know. It's a stupid thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And later on in the programme, we're going to talk about the new ice age, which is not far away. Did you see that story?
Well, it is a bit chilly today. I was wondering what it was all about.
Well, no, I mean, it's coming because the...
Well, that's good, isn't it? Because I'll go against global warming and it'll balance everything out nicely.
Well, that's what some people are saying.
It's just what we were looking for.
Global warming is not the horrific thing we were thinking it's going to be, because the sun goes every 10 years and then every 400 years, and this is the 400th year, into a state of severe hibernation, where there is a lot less sunspot activity. And in the last time it did this, the canals in Venice froze over, the Thames froze over regularly.
There was winter fairs, wasn't there?
Yeah, and we are now in the next few years heading into the big one of these.
Well, they said the ice age was coming in the 70s, didn't they? And then everyone went on about global warming. People forgot that the ice age is coming.
Yeah.
In all the kerfuffle about global warming.
Yeah.
They forgot.
I know. I mean, this is, it was in the Mirror and the Express and various newspapers today. So the scientist from, I think, is it Northumbria University? I'm not sure, but I think so.
That'll do.
She's coming on a little later to talk about this theory.
Brilliant.
And so if the planet does warm up in the way they say it's going to...
This is just what we needed.
Yeah. 03444991,000 about that later. Mike Graham today put a question in, he says he finds it very hard, I think, to find a credible reason to bring back the death penalty. But people are saying, is that what we should do? I don't know that it's going to work. In fact, some of these people will be quite happy just to be made a spectacle of, wouldn't they?
I don't know. I think it might work in certain cases.
Do you?
Yeah, it'd put people off, wouldn't it?
Well, I don't know, would it?
Yeah, cold-blooded murderers, yeah. They think they're going to get hanged rather than just get, 15 years if they're caught.
Mm.
It's a lot more off-putting, isn't it?
Well, there's a point, maybe. What are we going to do about this continual aggravation from idiots who want to go around killing people because they have some strange religious belief? Dr. Rakib Ehsan, I probably got your name wrong. I apologise profusely. Research fellow from the Centre for Radicalisation and Terrorism at the Henry Jackson Society. Is that right?
That's right, James.
Okay, matey, listen. What are your thoughts on this? How do we stop it? What do we do?
Well, I think that there's a recent announcement by the Justice Secretary, Robert Buckland, and it seems like the government's going to introduce an emergency law to end early prisoner release. I think after what happened with the London Bridge terrorist attack and the more recent Islamist terrorist attack in Streatham, I do think that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, but why has it taken this long to do?
If I'm being honest, James, I think that we've had a political elite and also a judicial elite who instinctively, when making decisions, when looking to pass counter-extremism legislation, they haven't prioritised the interests of the broader public safety the way they should. I think all too often there's been an emphasis on the individual rights of convicted terrorists, when in reality we should be focusing on ensuring the safety and stability of our local communities.
Yeah, because after the London Bridge attack, that's when all the discussion came that we've got to change the legislation, but it hasn't happened. It should have been like emergency pushed through, but I think because of the Brexit thing going on in the background, it was sort of put on the back burner a bit.
I think that's a possibility, and I think all too often we've placed too much faith in these rehabilitation courses run by the Home Office looking to de-radicalise convicted terrorists. But all too often it's been a case of misplaced idealism. We haven't been hard-headed enough and realistic when examining prospects for rehabilitation of people. Some of them have been found guilty of multiple terrorism-related offences, such as the terrorists behind the recent Streatham terrorist attack.
I mean, have we actually any proof that we can de-radicalise some of these people or not?
Well, I think the issue there is we're dealing with individuals who are quite cunning. Some of them remarkably intelligent. Yeah. That's the truth. So there is the risk that they could dupe or trick counsellors who are working on those de-radicalisation rehabilitative schemes, essentially giving them the impression that they have been successfully de-radicalised. They do reject these fundamentalist, violent ideologies, but in reality that they're still firmly wedded to these ideologies. And then once they are released back into the wider public, they still have intentions to carry out violent acts of terrorism.
Well, that's what happened on London Bridge, and it also gave them access to coming into central London.
Well, it's quite remarkable that Usman Khan, who's behind the London Bridge terrorist attack, he actually conducted his deadly acts of terror at a prisoner rehabilitation conference.
And killed two people that were involved in rehabilitating him.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's a story in the Sun today, Jihadis on the loose, and I think you probably know about this because I think it came from your society. At least 20 are back in London where they committed the terror offences that put them in jail. According to a Sun investigation last night, the Henry Jackson Society think tank said that your probe's findings were deeply disturbing.
Well, I'd make the point that if you're looking at the London Bridge and Streatham Islamist terrorist attacks, I have to say I think public confidence in both the judicial system and the effectiveness of counter-extremism agencies, it would be significantly damaged following these acts of terrorism. And I'd have to say that early release individuals who have been convicted of a spate of terrorism-related offences, such as Sudesh Aman, who was behind the Streatham terrorist attack, and Usman Khan, who's behind the London Bridge terrorist attack, these people, they represent a very serious risk pool within British society, and collectively they pose a fundamental threat to the safety and stability of our local communities. So I think that public authorities all too often they have failed to prioritise our national security and broader public safety.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. But what is going to be done? We can't just continue these arguments between people who think that they know better.
Well, I think I'll make the point that, so the Justice Secretary, Robert Buckland, he says that now, whether it's current or future offenders, people convicted of terrorism-related offences, they'll only be released until they've served at least 2/3 of their sentence and that their release is approved by the parole board. Because quite often people have been released automatically without any involvement or any assessment from the parole board. So I do think it's a step in the right direction. But if you're talking about, you know, how realistic should we be when it comes to examining the prospects of people being successfully rehabilitated, I do think we need to be more hard-headed and we need to be more rational when we're making those decisions.
It seems to be that when they get older, they get de-radicalised, when they get late 30s, early 40s, so maybe just keep them in long enough.
Well, no, you said... Go on, sorry.
Sorry, but I'd also make the point that we have to see... There's different shades of extremism. But the reality of the matter is we had a gentleman... well, I call him gentleman. That's me being exceptionally polite. We have a convicted terrorist here in Sudesh Oman. He actually instructed one of his romantic partners to decapitate her parents because he believed they were kuffar, that they were disbelievers. Mm. So we're dealing with someone who was very supportive of violent extremism. So the idea that this person was released halfway through what I would consider to be a lenient prison sentence of 3 years and 4 months, I think much of the British public will find that absolutely mind-boggling. So if you are looking to rehabilitate individuals, you have to make sure that they're given lengthy enough prison sentences in order for rehabilitation to even be a realistic prospect, because that takes a hell of a lot of time.
So how long would someone like that have got?
It differs from individual to individual, but I think in this case, we're talking about someone who was already given an initial prison sentence of 3 years and 4 months, and then he was auto-released after serving only half of that sentence. I can tell you now, even with favourable conditions, that is not long enough. No. That is simply not long enough at all. And we have to examine what we're working to begin with. You know, what stage of radicalisation is that specific individual at? We need to be more rational, and we need to examine this with a more hard-headed mindset.
But they get radicalised in prison, don't they, as well?
Well, I think that's another issue. So a lot of people talk about, it's going against their human rights if they're placed in solitary confinement. But the reality of the matter is, if there is a risk of perhaps an individual radicalising other prisoners, that person should be isolated. Yeah. Because they are a serious threat in terms of potentially radicalising fellow inmates. That needs to be part of the discussion. I think all too often we've been talking about human rights for people who have clearly broken the law and they've intended to carry out acts of terrorism. But it's time to be more hard-headed and prioritise the broader public interest.
Why do you think the last two of these people, London Bridge and this one, have had these fake suicide vests on? What was the point of that?
I think that it's a strategy. It's a tactic that is increasingly being seen with these attacks. I think what's also interesting, though, if I could add, is the fact that the Sudesh Oman, who's behind the Streatham terrorist attack, he used a knife. Now, interestingly, when he was initially in prison, one of the terrorist materials that was found in his possession was a manual instructing how to use a knife in an effective manner. So people will find this absolutely bonkers. They will. That this person, and it's very similar with Usman Khan, who was initially in prison for being part of a terror plot on the London Stock Exchange. He's then released. He's then placed on rehabilitation courses. What does he go on to do? Conduct a terrorist attack in London. Yeah. And this is unacceptable. The British public, they will not stand for it much further. So I do think that the Justice Secretary's announcement, it's a welcome one.
I do. I think that Boris will do everything he can. I think he will get a lot of things thrown in his way, unfortunately. But, we spend money on all sorts of strange things. We should be spending a little bit more money on this and sorting it out. We lock up people who don't need to be there. We could deal with them in some other way. And then say, we haven't got enough prison spaces, or we don't know. This guy who just came out obviously had around about 30 police officers keeping tabs on him.
Well, that's costly in itself,
Yeah,
I'd say.
I mean...
So, listen, I think that we hear a lot about costs, but ultimately, you know, we've seen the London Bridge terrorist attack cost the lives of 2 young people. Fortunately, on this occasion, no one has been killed, but multiple people were stabbed.
And one guy does have very serious injuries.
So I think in reality we could talk about costs, but we talk about the cost of keeping people in prison, but the potential human cost of releasing people who remain deeply dangerous individuals into our local communities, you can't place a price on that. You really can't. When you're talking about financial costs. So as I said, the public authorities, they need to better prioritise the public safety and national security. That needs to be their focus. Because I think all too often, if I'm being perfectly honest, I think there's been a bit too much virtue signalling when it comes to counter-extremism.
Would it do any good bringing back capital punishment, even if it is just a lethal injection?
Well, James, I think I remember when you had me on your show last year, I did express my support for that in certain cases. And I think that, interestingly, I would say this. If people don't have confidence in the judicial system and the sentencing regime that is in place for convicted terrorists who want to do fundamental harm to ordinary members of the public, you will see a backlash and you will see an increase in support for certain crimes. You will see support for capital punishment.
But they don't care about dying. They all have died anyway. They all know they're going to die.
That's the issue. And I think that's a very important point that you raised, because in this sense, if you were to introduce capital punishment and apply the death sentence, many of these Islamist terrorists, they crave martyrdom. They want to be seen as martyrs. And I think in that sense, you don't want to provide that narrative of the state taking someone's life and then making them a martyr, because in a sense that could actually backfire when you're looking to deal with the scourge of Islamist extremism. So it's a complicated issue. It's difficult.
Rakib, thank you for your time. Good to talk to you. I'm sure we'll talk again soon, maybe before another year. Dr. Rakib Ehsan, Research Fellow from the Centre on Radicalisation and Terrorism at the Henry Jackson Society. Got any thoughts? Call me, 0344 499 1000. John is in Newcastle. John, good evening.
I am in Newcastle, James. It's one of those things that it doesn't need a knee-jerk reaction to this, but it does need a very rapid reaction. It's not something where it should be ill-considered. It should be something which is thought about.
For how long, John, would you like us to think about it?
I would imagine a couple of months, to be honest with you, at least. Or
John,
at most.
what are we going to do? Hang on, John. What are we going to do when we think about it for a couple of months? Because I don't think
come up with an answer at the end of it.
I don't think I need to think about it at all. Yeah. If you do, tell me what I need to think about.
Tell me what you think about that, James, at this point in time. I'd love to hear your sort of...
I just told you, I don't think there's anything to think about. I think we just lock them up, throw away the key, forget about them, come back 10 years later and see
when they're older,
okay.
They're older and calm down.
We don't have the money, James, to do that.
Of course we have the money. We have the money to do whatever we need to do.
It won't be so luxury prison. It's too luxurious.
Really, I would have thought that it should be harsh penalties.
Exactly.
In the harshest of prisons, and they should be segregated. And if they got 2 hours out a day, segregated from everybody else, that would be fine. But having said that, that's not going to stop their brothers or their sisters or their moms or their dads saying sort of, oh, my son, my daughter, my sister is sort of kept in prison. You know about sort of, I don't know what the hell the girl's name was that's in Syria, and she's screaming and crying, oh, I've lost my baby, and to come back. I haven't a clue what her name is. And I hope she never comes back to this country. But it's something where it will cost you and me money in our taxes to keep these out of society. I don't really feel like paying that. I feel like paying towards the NHS. I feel like paying towards the police force. I feel like paying towards a lot. And I wouldn't mind if the government put taxes up. by a penny in the pound, 2 pence in the pound, or things like that. What I don't want to do is keep these people off our streets and pay a fortune to keep them.
So you'd execute them?
Yeah.
Is that what you do then?
Yeah.
Well, what, as you execute them, is that what you're...
No, I wouldn't execute them.
Well, what's your solution then? You're saying we don't... What is your solution? You're saying you don't want to keep them because it's expensive.
You're getting very radical, a bit like me, aren't you? Yeah. John, OK, we get the idea. Thank you very much indeed. Let's talk to Paul.
I didn't understand it.
Well, nor did I, so that's why we're going to Paul. Yeah. Hello, Paul.
Good evening, James and Ash.
All right.
How are you doing, mate, fellas? Right, I want to able to speak to you, James, on Friday night on the Brexit, because you're a busy man at the time, but how are you feeling these days? And now we're a free society.
Great.
Obviously.
Great. I've been celebrating all day, all
this is more
weekend.
like it.
I'm now knackered. It's a great free nation in which we live. Yeah,
Right,
I've done that.
okay.
And, of course, the BBC and the ITV can be as lefty as they like. They can not show our Prime Minister's speech. The BBC can try and put up their fee. It is ridiculous. They are, but the ITV and BBC, we need a radical rethink about the way our broadcasting is organised in this country from those two large organisations.
Hey, James, and do you realise that the BBC have put the licence fee up 3.5%? Today, I think, starting from next year, 3.5%. They put their licence fee up by 3.5%. Our wages in Northampton hasn't changed for the last 15 years for the influx for the East Europeans, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, getting back to my point, I'm rejoicing. As you know, I'm moving back up to West Yorkshire. And Ash, by the way, Ash, I think our village going down there, you know, mate. But anyway, James, I know you don't like football, but...
Yeah, good. Thank you. I've had enough of that. Mention the word football. You're not staying on the programme. That's it.
Villa will not be going down. I don't
want to hear football.
No,
I don't want to hear it.
We'll be doing that in the next
03444991000. James, the death penalty will never be brought back in Britain if we hang people or we gas them. That's going a bit extreme. For heinous crimes, then we actually become a heinous as them. It's as simple as
It's not
that.
really, though, is it? Because they've already done something bad.
The River Thames and rivers of England and Scotland froze over, and the Straits of Gibraltar was almost impossible with the last mini ice age.
Tell me about it.
Yeah.
Terrible. It's terrible.
You remember?
Yeah.